In 2007, Nokia sold more than 400 million mobile phones. It held roughly 40% of the entire global mobile phone market, more than its next three competitors combined. It was the pride of an entire nation. At its height, this single company accounted for a significant share of all of Finland's economic growth, a quarter of the country's corporate taxes, and a large fraction of the value of its stock market. 6 years later, Nokia sold its phone business to Microsoft, and within a few years after that, the Nokia name had vanished from new phones almost entirely. This is the long fall of Nokia. To understand how far Nokia fell, you first have to understand how strange and how old the company was. Nokia did not begin as a technology company. It began in 1865 as a single pulp mill on a riverbank in southwestern Finland, manufacturing paper. Over the following century, Nokia became a sprawling industrial conglomerate. It made paper, it made rubber boots and tires, it made electrical cable, it made televisions. It was, for decades, simply a large and slightly unfocused Finnish manufacturer of physical things. The transformation came in the 1980s and early 1990s, and it was driven by a decision of remarkable nerve. Finland deregulated its telecommunications market early, and Nokia, looking at its messy collection of businesses, made a choice. It would bet everything on mobile telephones. Under a chief executive named Jorma Ollila, Nokia methodically sold off the rest of itself: the paper, the rubber, the cable, the televisions, the whole industrial history of the company, and poured the proceeds into mobile phones. It was an extraordinary act of focus, and the timing was perfect. Nokia placed its entire weight on mobile phones at almost exactly the moment the world was about to want billions of them. And the bet paid off beyond anything its makers could have predicted. Through the 1990s and into the 2000s, Nokia became the most successful mobile phone company on Earth. Its phones were famous for being tough, reliable, and beautifully simple to use. The Nokia 3310, released in 2000, became one of the best-selling phones in history and a global symbol of a device that simply would not break. By the mid-2000s, Nokia held around 40% of the world market. In Finland, it was no longer just a company, it was the national champion. The proof that a small, cold, remote country of 5 million people could produce a company that led the entire world. A Finnish child of that era grew up understanding that the most important company on the planet was theirs. At its peak, Nokia's dominance was almost difficult to overstate. In the year 2007, the company sold more than 400 million phones, well over 1 million handsets every single day. In large parts of the developing world, Nokia was not a brand of phone. It was the word for phone. The company had built distribution networks reaching markets that no competitor could touch, and a manufacturing operation of staggering scale and efficiency. And Nokia was, in many ways, genuinely a great company. This is important because the simple story that Nokia was lazy or arrogant or asleep is not true. Nokia's hardware engineering was superb. Its manufacturing was world-class. Its logistics were the envy of the industry. It even understood early that the future of the phone was software and the mobile internet. Nokia research teams built touchscreen prototypes years before the iPhone. They experimented with tablet-like internet devices. They had, sitting in their own laboratories, glimpses of the very future that would later destroy them. Nokia's problem was never a lack of talent, or a lack of vision, or a lack of warning. Nokia's problem was that it had become too large, too successful, and too organized around the phone it already sold. Inside Nokia, the structure that had built the empire was now quietly becoming the cage. The company was vast, and it was organized into competing internal divisions, each with its own targets, its own leadership, its own software. It ran an operating system called Symbian, a system that had been designed in an earlier era for phones with keypads and tiny screens, and that had grown over years into a tangled and aging structure that was painful and slow to change. Every part of the company was measured on the phones it shipped this year. And a company where every incentive points at this year's phone is a company that will struggle badly to build the phone that makes this year's phone obsolete. On January 9th, 2007, on a stage in San Francisco, Apple introduced the iPhone. It was not at first an obvious threat to Nokia. It was expensive. It worked on only one wireless network in one country. Its battery life was modest. It could not be used with one thumb the way a Nokia could. It sold in its first year a tiny fraction of the volume Nokia shipped. Many people inside Nokia looked at the first iPhone and saw, accurately, a flawed and overpriced niche product. But they were measuring the wrong thing. The iPhone was not really a better phone. It was a different kind of object. It was a small, powerful, internet-connected computer that happened to make calls. A pocket-sized screen running real software with a full web browser and soon an app store where anyone in the world could build and sell programs for it. The competition was no longer about the phone. It was about the software, the operating system, and the ecosystem of applications built on top of it. Nokia, looking at the iPhone, kept asking how its hardware compared. It did not fully grasp that the hardware had stopped being the contest. And then, in 2008, came the second blow. Google released Android, a modern smartphone operating system, and gave it away for free to every other phone maker on Earth. Nokia was now caught between Apple above it and a free, fast-moving Android world rising beneath it. Inside Nokia, the years after 2007 were not years of denial, exactly. They were years of paralysis. The company knew Symbian was failing against the iPhone and Android, so it began building a new, modern operating system, a project that came to be known by the name MeeGo. But the new system was developed slowly by a separate part of the company, while the rest of Nokia kept pouring resources into the old Symbian phones that still earned the money. The two efforts competed for funding, for engineers, for management attention, for the company's very identity. Nokia spent its most precious years not building the future and not fully defending the past, but standing, frozen and divided in the gap between them. In 2010, with Nokia visibly losing ground, the company's board made a dramatic decision. For the first time in its history, Nokia hired a chief executive from outside Finland. And not just outside Finland, but from the heart of the American software industry. His name was Stephen Elop, and he came directly from a senior position at Microsoft. In early 2011, Elop sent a memo to all of Nokia's employees that became instantly famous across the entire technology world. In it, he described a man standing on a burning oil platform in the freezing North Sea, forced to choose between staying on the platform and being consumed by the fire, or leaping into the icy water below. The memo's message was blunt and devastating. Nokia, Elop wrote, was standing on a burning platform. The company was years behind. It had no winning strategy. It had to jump. And then, days later, Elop announced where Nokia would jump to. Nokia would abandon its own operating systems. It would not finish MeeGo. It would not save Symbian. Instead, it would build its future smartphones around Windows Phone, the mobile operating system made by Microsoft, Stephen Elop's former employer. The Windows Phone decision is one of the most argued over moves in modern business history. Defenders say Nokia's own software was hopeless, and that partnering with Microsoft was the only realistic path. Critics point at what happened in between, the gap. When Elop announced that Symbian was finished and the future was Windows Phone, he effectively told the entire world to stop buying Nokia's current phones. But the new Windows phones would not be ready for many months. In that long gap, Nokia's existing sales collapsed far faster than anyone had planned for. The decision to jump had been announced before there was anything solid to land on. And when the Windows phones finally arrived, they were genuinely well made, beautifully designed, and almost no one bought them. The customers and the app developers had already chosen Apple and Android. Nokia had jumped, and the third platform it landed on was already too small to stand on. Between 2011 and 2013, Nokia's position did not erode. It caved in. The company's share of the global smartphone market fell from a commanding lead to a small single-digit number. Its credit rating was cut to junk status. It posted billions of euros in losses. The Nokia share price, which had been one of the most valuable in Europe, fell more than 90% from its peak. And the pain was not only financial, it was national. Nokia had been the engine of the Finnish economy, and as Nokia shrank, Finland felt every part of it. The company cut tens of thousands of jobs. It closed factories and research centers. In Finland, towns that had been built around Nokia facilities watched those facilities wind down. The wider Finnish technology economy did adapt over time. Many laid-off Nokia engineers went on to found new companies, and the country worked hard to reinvent itself. But the years of the collapse were a genuine national wound. A whole country had organized a piece of its identity and its prosperity around a single company, and now it had to watch that company fall. Nokia's Windows phones never recovered. The phones were praised by reviewers and ignored by buyers. The fundamental problem could not be fixed by good hardware. A smartphone in the 2010s was only as valuable as the universe of apps that ran on it. And the world's app developers were writing for Apple and for Android, and not in any serious numbers for the small and shrinking Windows Phone platform. Nokia had built a beautiful house in a neighborhood where no one wanted to live. By 2013, it was clear inside the company that the phone business, the business Nokia had bet its entire identity on, the business that had made Finland proud, could not survive on its own. In September 2013, Nokia announced that it would sell its mobile phone business, the entire devices and services division, the heart of the company, to Microsoft. The price was around 7 billion euros. Microsoft would take the factories, the phone designs, the Lumia brand, and tens of thousands of Nokia employees, including eventually Stephen Elop himself, who returned to the company he had come from. For many Finns, the sale was a moment of real national grief. The company that had been the country's pride was handing its most famous business to an American giant. And then the story took a final, brutal turn. Microsoft's attempt to compete in smartphones with the former Nokia business failed almost completely. Within about 2 years of the purchase, Microsoft wrote down the value of the Nokia phone business by billions of dollars, acknowledging in the language of accounting that what it had bought was now worth close to nothing. It cut tens of thousands of the jobs it had acquired. It wound the smartphone effort down. The Lumia line was discontinued. The phone business that had once put a handset in nearly half the world's pockets had been sold for 7 billion euros, and then, in the hands of its buyer, essentially evaporated. The Nokia name disappeared from new phones. You can tell the story of Nokia as a story about the iPhone. You can tell it as a story about Android, given away for free. You can tell it as a story about one famous memo and one fateful bet on Windows Phone. All of those things are true, and each of them mattered. But the deepest cause is something quieter, and it is the cruelest part of the story, because it was not a weakness. It was a strength that curdled. Nokia was killed by being too good at the thing it already was. It was the best phone maker in the world. Its hardware, its manufacturing, its logistics, its distribution, all of it was world-class. All of it tuned to perfection over 20 years. All of it organized to ship hundreds of millions of phones a year. And that perfection became a kind of gravity. Every incentive, every division, every engineer, every quarterly target pulled toward the phone Nokia already knew how to make. So when the world changed, when the contest stopped being about the phone and became about the software and the ecosystem, Nokia could see it and could even build pieces of it in its labs, but it could not turn the whole enormous, perfectly tuned machine fast enough to face the new direction. No competitor truly outbuilt Nokia. Nokia was killed by the weight of its own excellence. Too large, too successful, and too finely organized around an answer the world had quietly stopped asking for. In 2007, Nokia held 40% of the world's mobile phone market and was the pride of an entire nation. 6 years later, it sold the phone business to Microsoft, and within a few more years, that business had been written down to nearly nothing, and the Nokia name was gone from new phones. The company itself still exists, quietly, building the network equipment behind the world's mobile signals. But the phone in your pocket, the thing Nokia once defined, belongs to other names now. Thank you for watching The Long Fall. If decline stories like this one interest you, the channel will be here.